Happy weekend to you, NIO fam. I finally got the data queued up and let's talk about it. This is from the year of 2025, and we actually might be seeing the pivot point happen right now in the Chinese market. Let's talk about first the BEV brands. And there's one thing I actually want to lead with this. Firefly did not make the top 20. However, they sold about 40,000 for the year, and December was a month where they did over 7,000. So they're trending in the direction of, as you see, if you'll look at the bottom of the screen, the first major growth phase as I've identified it, and these are the sub brands we're talking about first, Firefly and Onvo, which are newer compared to the NIO brand. But I think that the NIO brand, having established itself and starting to be known within the country of China as premium luxury, I think that is going to bode well once more folks are aware of the sub brands and recognize they're coming from the NIO ecosystem. I think that long-term value play and that recognition could go a long way for all three brands. But I do still think that it is important that NIO continue to get that market and brand awareness out there for all three brands. But so Firefly with roughly 40,000, obviously not making the top 20 for the year. Let's see what happens in 2026 if they can't make it. And by the way, this is just the BEV brands that we're talking about first here, okay? So if we look at Onvo with just the two models and only part of a year of deliveries with the Onvo L90, you had them coming in at the 17th spot, over 110,000. And then the NIO brand, of course, the premium brand in the top 10, actually at the number 9 spot with over 176,000. But, and we'll get to that. There's an important data point here that we'll get to. I'm telling myself mentally, just slow down, Aaron. Just pace yourself here. This is the passenger vehicle. This is all brands. So you've got the BEVs, the ICE or gas vehicles, and the NEVs, which incorporate sort of the EREVs, extended range EVs, or plug-in hybrids and that kind of thing. So the blue represents the ICE or gas, the green represents the BEV, and the orange is the plug-in hybrid or the EREV. So the thing that I do want to highlight here, especially with this data pulled up, and this is why I've been waiting for this kind of aesthetic presentation, because the color coding makes it easier to see that when we look across the entire market, there's still a lot of blue showing up. And in particular, if we look at where NIO and the NIO brand is looking to compete, and frankly, I think Onvo as well, you've got Audi, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz has dropped a little bit, but those three are the main. I keep hitting or pointing at Nissan. I'm not trying to include them here. They're in the spot that Benz used to be, so that's messing with me. But you're talking about over a million, about 1.5 million of sales for those three brands, those German brands that have historically dominated the premium and luxury end of the market in China. So that's still a huge number, representing a big piece of that upper priced market that NIO can continue to take share. And with the ES9, which I didn't have queued up for this video, but if that's going to be announced in April, that makes what the ES8 has done even more exciting. But we'll get to that here in just a second, because actually this is where you can actually start seeing the end of the year, which the ES8 refresh, remember, was late in the year. And yet look at NIO taking a dominant position versus, and just with respect to the BEV brands and that price point, the 400,000 to 500,000 RMB price range. Also, you've got NIO in the second spot for the 300,000 to 400,000 RMB price range. And again, this is just the BEVs. We'll look at all passenger vehicles and where NIO ranks, relative to those in just a second. You've also got NIO with some sales in the 200,000 to 300,000 RMB price range. And so that placed in the top 10. Also, Onvo, obviously, in the top 5 here at the number 4 spot. And then NIO in the 500,000 RMB price range and above in the top 3, basically, in the third place spot for the year. Now, we'll talk about the ES9 in just a second, because I want to finish talking this data, kind of finish my thought here, and also look at NIO in comparison to all passenger vehicle brands. Because again, I think this, and recognizing how much blue is still here, especially with this heavy blue for Audi, BMW, and Mercedes, I think that's where NIO is looking to take more market share. And as we see now coming into the 300,000 RMB price range and above, you've got BMW, you've got Audi, you've got Mercedes-Benz, you've got Mercedes-Benz, you've got Audi, you've got BMW, you've got BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Audi. So obviously, all three are still representing a lot of sales that in the future will go somewhere else if they don't have the good enough product on the BEV side of things. And I just don't see anyone competing with NIO at the level with vehicles like the ES8 and now the upcoming ES9. So if we come back to this chart, because this is the BEV rankings and price range. And again, I think this data point here is the one that I'm so excited about, because NIO with the ES8 refresh in just, basically the latter part of the year, to do the numbers that they've done on the sales side, I think we're starting to see the convergence of the brand awareness, the market awareness, and NIO coming out with these products that, because they're recognized as premium and luxury, people are willing to pay for them. And I think we will see more of the same, especially if you start thinking in terms of, well, there were, roughly 1.5 million sales for those three German brands that were all ICE or gas sales. That is a lot of market share NIO can still take. So I think it's important that they actually continue what they've been doing, coming out with these, leading products like the ES8. And with the ES9, what I'm wondering is, where's that price point going to be? And if it is as strong as, let's say, the ES8, both on the price point side and also with its positioning and the vehicle margins being strong enough, I think we've got a phenomenal shot of seeing NIO come in with a full year of profitability. That's going to be important. And obviously the second major growth phase. I do want to talk just briefly about stock price. I'm checking the time here first. Okay. Either way, even if I go over 8 minutes, which means there would be ads in this video, I'll still create timestamps or chapters so that you can easily navigate or come back and reference it. That's what I often like to do myself. So, but let's talk about, and those are in the description, by the way. You just click more or look down at the bottom of the screen to see what those are once I've set them up. The close for NIO on Friday, and I wanted to wait and see where things would close. I wasn't really surprised by the price action, and we had another low volume day, under 60 million shares traded. So kind of not exciting, really. Thursday was interesting. At the open, there were about 20 million shares traded within the first 5-10 minutes, and then it kind of dropped off over the course of that day, only about 70 million. So the volume side of things remains very low. You see where the volume was higher, and the NIO stock price ran from below $4 to about $8 just intra-year. NIO has the potential to move like that. Probably it's going to need big volume, and it's probably going to need big volume on numerous days to see. And I think what we might end up seeing is kind of a shift of sentiment at the same time that, maybe it's all going to, come into that sort of March, April timeframe. That's the window I think is most compelling in the shorter term. But also knowing that the ES9, if it's going to be announced and kind of make its debut, and I don't know how fast they'll be getting deliveries out, but if that is, let's say, in April, that makes the time frame even more compelling, particularly if NIO can continue with the big delivery numbers of the ES8, and then everything else sort of following along and continuing to improve as the brand awareness, the market awareness continues for not just NIO, but all three brands. But I think, this is kind of a final thought. And we will have updated data on the FTD side of things. This is represented by these white lines, and these elevated spikes. This is a big spike that we had recently in the most recent data. It also aligned with that January expiry date that I was watching and tracking and talking about here on the channel. There were so many options that were going to expire out of the money. That was why I kind of watched that. And so it definitely could be that this was a part of, certain parties making sure the price point stayed, within the range where they wanted it. And it did come in there. But now there's and I didn't pull the data for this video, but basically we don't have that huge number in the near term on any, options expiry that I've seen. So if anything like that pops up again, I'll let you know. But for me, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm just thinking between such low volume and the idea that, if folks want to say that, this is not manipulation, I'm not sure with such low volume why there wouldn't be shares available to be traded. You know what I mean? So that's just my simple thinking, a little bit of logic, nothing crazy here. And then looking back at the data, can we or will we see this kind of move in the year of 2026? I don't know. But I think if we're going to see something crazy, and even if we're going to see any upside acceleration for the stock price in this year of 2026, I do think we're going to have to see bigger volume for that to happen. So the trade volume on the daily side of things continues to be just the easiest thing, in my mind at least, without having to do any TA or anything like that. But final thought, if I can remember what it was, because my mind just kind of went blank as I'm looking at the screen. And oh, here's the final thought. Yeah, I wanted to offer this because I know some folks have made the argument that a Chinese stock will never be allowed to run. It'll never go very high. And I'm not comparing NIO to Alibaba, but Alibaba has been over $300 a share. So we have seen, that price point hit for a Chinese stock. However, I'll reference and I'll actually link it if you haven't seen it, my IDE video. I chose NIO as a long-term play because it's an IDE, an innovative driven enterprise. And those companies are very disruptive. And a lot of times early on, they're heavily shorted. And so I'm actually going to pull this back up. And so what I've done in that video, I actually pulled up different tickers, different companies, companies and stocks like Amazon, Netflix, Tesla, Nvidia, Apple. These companies, there was a point where people talked about, well, streaming will never work, and so that would have been sort of the argument or the bear case against a company like Netflix, let's say. Apple, they would say, well, their integration and the way they're built, that business model won't work. They've done okay. Tesla, of course, Tesla's a little bit different because they did need basically government subsidies to get to profitability, and both the US and Chinese government to help them out, which is kind of ironic to me. But anyway, you did see probably one of the biggest short squeezes ever with that stock once, they hit that profitability, got included in the S&P 500. So I guess where I'm going with this is for the folks and the argument that a Chinese stock will never move as much. I pulled up the charts on all of those other tickers that I just mentioned, and I've looked at them. And when you look at the history and the FTD versus the stock price, not one of them had a move like this as early as NIO. And NIO was nowhere near profitability at this stage, at this point. And so that makes profitability so much more compelling in my mind. And I think it also flips that narrative upside down, because here's the other thought. And this is, again, taking a different viewpoint and not just being stuck in echo chamber of what you want to think or believe. The assumption or presumption that the future will look exactly like the present or the past, I think it's a dangerous way to be thinking, because with companies like Amazon, there was a point where Amazon had zero, delivery trucks on the road. Now you see them every day here in the US. I think most people do anyway. So, this is just an indicator of how things can shift and change. And if the Chinese narrative ever changes, and especially with that meeting with Trump going over there in April and the leverage that the Chinese have, I just think things get very interesting. Also, final thought, and this is kind of a reference, I'll link it in the description, because I referenced that Trump actually was talking about and invited EV manufacturers or makers to come over to the US just recently when he was at, I think he was at Ford when he actually did that. And he invited them to come over and put factories here. And I wonder if that won't be part of the leverage player or part of the agreement, or however it's going to be touted once that's done. I don't know. But again, I think for me at least, the most compelling time frame to track is March, April, and then probably into the rest of the year to see what happens, not just with NIO on the delivery side and the launch and announcement of the ES9, but also seeing if they can continue these big numbers with the ES8, which obviously is going to help margins and profitability prospects. So there's a lot more that they're doing as well. There's no way I could cover it all in one video, but in this one, I just thought the data point was too phenomenal for just a shortened, essentially, a late in the year refresh on the ES8. And this is what we see. And then even against all passenger vehicle brands, you see it ranking in the top 10. That's great. That's phenomenal. And I think there is more of that to come, especially if the ES9 is as strong of a product as the ES8. But drop it in the comments. I want to hear from you. I talked far longer than I planned. So let me get this thing up and out. Have a great day or night whenever you see this. I'll see y'all again very soon.